FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
Much of economic behavior is very age-specific. And consequently, when you change the distribution of the ages across an economy, you get different economic behavior. In particular, saving is very age-specific. People save in their 30s to their mid-50s. After that, they dissave. They start spending down. So as the population, as a nation's population shifts towards becoming much older, saving rates fall. And with them, in many places, investment rates fall. I remember when Japan was a high saving society. It had a saving rate of 25%. It's 5% today. This has happened globally. And in countries like Japan and much of Western Europe, the result has been a significant slowdown in investment. And one of the reasons why countries like Germany and France over the last 15 years have been growing at 1 to 2% a year instead of formerly 3 to 4% a year. In other countries, we also saw economic miracles driven by this. In countries, and that was by the baby booms, in countries that, as their baby booms were emerging, increased investment in education and infrastructure created economic miracles because they had this huge bulge of much more well-prepared workers. Economists have looked at places like East Asia, the Tigers, and at Ireland, and 40 to 50% of the change in the growth rates in this country can be linked to demographics, simply to the change in the distribution of the populations. In countries which didn't make those investments, and Latin America is the kind of outstanding example of this globally, growth has been slow, and the demographic bulge, in fact, has become a burden. In 1960, Latin America and East Asia were essentially at the same point in economic development. Over that, from the 1970 on, East Asia has grown at average annual rates, depending on which country you're looking at, 5 to 7% a year for 35 years, and Latin America at 1 to 2% a year for 35 years. It leaves you at an entirely different place in economic development. So, and in the United States, the demographic, in Europe and Japan, the second part of the economic cost of this shift is now that they confront shrinking labor forces. The labor force of Italy and Japan is already beginning to shrink at an annual rate of about 1% a year. The same thing will hit Germany and England, or Germany and France, and a number of other countries in Europe starting between 2012 or 2015. The fact of the matter is that growth is the combination of productivity and increases in productivity and increases in the size of the labor force. The OECD says that, projects that between 2010 and 2020, Western Europe, the major economies of Western Europe will grow at an average annual rate of 1 to 2% a year. I think they're optimistic. I think that one of the things we're looking at right now is the economic decline of Europe and Japan. And a significant part of this is demographics. The United States escapes much of this, at least in the short term, for for two reasons. One is our fertility rates have always been higher, a little higher than Europe. It must be cultural. I have no explanation for it as an economist or a political observer. The real powerful factor here, however, is immigration. Immigration, it's a twofer. You get young people without their aging parents, and immigrant groups tend to maintain the birth rates of their native countries for one generation. Consequently, our labor force will continue to expand. And so we are escaping much of this. And